What if the things that are quietly destroying your life are not the obvious ones, not the addiction, not the toxic relationship, not the job you hate, but the invisible ones? The ones so woven into the fabric of your daily existence that you have stopped seeing them entirely. There is a particular kind of suffering that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. It is not acute. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a crisis or a breakdown or a moment so undeniable that everyone around you can see it too. It is the suffering of a life that is almost right. Almost fulfilling. Almost peaceful. Almost the version you imagined when you were younger and everything still felt possible. Close enough that you can't justify calling it a disaster. Far enough that you can't stop feeling the distance. And most people who live inside that gap spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, looking outward for the explanation. The wrong job. The wrong city. The wrong relationship. The wrong luck. But the truth, the uncomfortable, liberating, life-altering truth, is that for most people living in that gap, the problem is not what they need to add. It is what they have not yet had the courage to remove. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not with announcements or explanations or permission from anyone. Quietly. This is a conversation about 7 things, 7 specific, identifiable, deeply human things, that are costing you more than you currently understand. Things that are occupying space in your life, your mind, your time, and your energy that belongs to something far greater. And the invitation today is simple. Start removing them. Silently. Systematically. Without telling a single soul. Let the results speak. The first thing, the need for other people's approval. Let's begin here. Because this one is the root of almost everything else on this list. There is a man I want you to meet. His name is Raymond. Raymond is 43 years old, moderately successful by every external measure, and almost completely incapable of making a decision, any decision, from the significant to the trivial, without first consulting the imaginary panel of judges that lives permanently inside his head. What will his mother think? What will his colleagues say? Will his friends understand? Will his choices make him look responsible, ambitious, admirable, appropriately serious, but not too serious, successful but not showy, humble but not weak? Raymond has never made a purely autonomous decision in his adult life. And Raymond is exhausted. Not from the work of living. From the work of performing living for an audience that, in most cases, is far too preoccupied with their own imaginary panels to pay the attention Raymond imagines they are paying to him. The need for approval is one of the most expensive habits a human being can carry. And I use the word habit deliberately, because it is not a personality trait, not an immovable feature of who you are. It is a learned behavior. A conditioned response. A pattern installed usually in childhood, when the approval of the people around you was genuinely necessary for your survival and well-being. But you are not a child anymore. And the approval of people who are not living your life is not necessary for anything you are trying to build. Epictetus, who understood constraint and freedom more intimately than almost any philosopher in history, wrote with devastating clarity, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." The people who change their lives, build things that matter, become who they were genuinely capable of becoming, they are almost never the ones who waited for consensus. They are the ones who made the decision, absorbed the discomfort of being misunderstood, and kept moving. Remove the need for approval. Not the desire for connection, that is different and beautiful and entirely worth keeping. But the need. The suffocating, momentum-killing, life-shrinking need to have other people confirm that your choices are acceptable before you will commit to them. Remove it quietly. Make one decision this week entirely on your own terms, without consulting the panel. And feel what it is like to live from the inside out. The second thing, the conversations you keep replaying. Here is something that will make you uncomfortable because it is true. There are people living rent-free in your head right now who have no idea they are there. The colleague who said something dismissive in a meeting 3 weeks ago. The friend who didn't show up the way you needed them to. The argument that ended badly and was never properly resolved. The moment you said the wrong thing and the look on their face that you have replayed so many times it has become more vivid than the actual memory. You are not thinking about these things because they are important. You are thinking about them because your brain, specifically the part of your brain responsible for social survival, is trying to solve them. Trying to find the angle, the explanation, the perfect response that would have changed the outcome. Trying to prepare you for a confrontation that, in most cases, will never actually happen. And while your brain is busy running this loop, this exhausting, circular, completely unproductive loop, the present moment is passing. The opportunity in front of you is going unmet. The energy that your actual life requires is being consumed by a conversation that ended weeks ago. A woman named Patricia had a conflict with her sister that lasted, in real time, approximately 45 minutes. In Patricia's head, it lasted 4 years. 4 years of replaying, reframing, rehearsing, relitigating. 4 years of falling asleep to the argument and waking up to it. 4 years of the original 45 minutes colonizing the mental space that her own life was supposed to inhabit. When Patricia finally addressed it, not the argument with her sister, but the loop in her own mind, she said something that I have never forgotten. I gave her 4 years of my life and she didn't even know I was still in the room. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The replaying conversation is not a sign that something needs to be resolved externally. It is a signal that something needs to be released internally. Stop giving your mental real estate to people who aren't paying rent. Remove the loop. Not by forcing yourself not to think about it, suppression doesn't work and you already know that. But by consciously, deliberately redirecting. Every time the loop starts, notice it, name it, and return your attention to what is actually in front of you. It takes practice. It takes patience. And it is one of the most profound acts of self-reclamation available to you. The third thing, the identity that no longer fits. This one is subtle. And it is one of the most important things on this list. You are not who you were 5 years ago. Most people know this intellectually. But the way we live, the stories we tell about ourselves, the roles we inhabit, the labels we carry, the ways we introduce ourselves and explain ourselves and limit ourselves, often reflects a version of who we were rather than who we have become. The person who decided at 22 that they were not a creative person and has been living inside that declaration for 15 years, even as evidence to the contrary has accumulated quietly all around them. The person who was told they were the responsible one in their family and has spent decades performing responsibility at the expense of spontaneity, joy, and genuine self-expression. The person who went through something hard, a failure, a loss, a period of genuine struggle, and somewhere in the processing of that experience, absorbed it as identity. I am someone who things go wrong for. I am someone who doesn't finish things. I am someone who gets left. Identities like these are not truth. They are conclusions. Drawn at specific moments, under specific conditions, by a version of you that had access to far less information and far less life than the version sitting here today. And they are costing you the future you are capable of. There was a man named Samuel who had identified as shy since elementary school. A teacher had described him that way once, in passing, in a parent-teacher conference he wasn't supposed to overhear. And something about hearing it said with such certainty, by an adult, about him, as if it were simply a fact of his nature like eye color or height, lodged it permanently. For 30 years, Samuel organized his life around that word. Avoided situations that challenged it. Confirmed it constantly through choices made in its service. At 40, in a moment of unusual honesty, Samuel asked himself a question he had never asked before. Is this actually true? Or is this just a story I heard about myself before I was old enough to disagree? It took him 2 years to fully answer it. But the asking changed everything. Remove the identity that no longer fits. Not loudly, you don't need to announce a rebrand. Just quietly, privately, stop introducing yourself to yourself in terms that limit what you are allowed to become. Try on a different story. See how it fits. You might be surprised how long you've been living in a house that was built for someone else. The third thing, the habit of explaining yourself. You do not owe anyone a paragraph for your decisions. Read that again. Because for many people, particularly those who grew up in environments where their choices were constantly questioned, where love came with conditions, where being understood felt like survival, the habit of over-explanation runs so deep it feels like honesty. It is not honesty. It is anxiety wearing the costume of communication. When you say no and immediately follow it with 3 sentences of justification. When you make a life choice and preemptively defend it before anyone has questioned it. When you change direction and feel compelled to explain yourself to people who were not involved in the original direction, you are not being transparent. You are seeking permission retroactively. And permission seeking is the habit of someone who does not yet fully believe they are allowed to be the author of their own life. Think about the most grounded people you have ever encountered. The ones who move through the world with that quiet, unshakable sense of authority. Notice something about them. They are decisive without being aggressive. They are clear without being cold. And crucially, they are brief. They say what they mean. They mean what they say. And they do not append a legal defense to every personal choice. This is not aloofness. It is self-possession. Remove the habit of over-explanation. Start small. The next time you decline an invitation, try saying, "I won't be able to make it," without the paragraph. The next time you make a choice someone questions, try, "This is what works for me," without the justification. Notice the discomfort. Sit in it. Let it pass. And then notice something else, the quiet dignity of a person who trusts their own decisions enough to make them without a courtroom argument. That dignity is available to you. Right now. In the next conversation you have. The need for approval, that exhausting, invisible panel of judges that has been sitting in on every decision you have ever made. The replaying conversations, the mental real estate you have been giving, for free, to people and moments that ended long ago. The identity that no longer fits, the story about yourself that was written before you had enough life to write your own. The habit of explaining yourself, the anxiety-driven performance of justification for a life that requires no justification other than the fact that it is yours. These 4 alone, removed quietly, consistently, with the patient discipline of someone who has decided their life is worth reclaiming, will begin to create space. Real, tangible, palpable space. Space that you will feel in your mornings. In your conversations. In the quality of your own company. You are still here. And I want you to understand what that means, not as flattery, not as a warm opening to make you feel good about yourself, but as a genuine observation about the kind of person who makes it to the second half of a conversation like this one. Most people stop before the uncomfortable part. Most people consume content about change the same way they consume content about dieting, with enormous enthusiasm right up until the moment it asks something real of them. Then they close the tab. Move to the next thing. Tell themselves they'll come back to it later. Later never comes. But you are still here. Which tells me something. It tells me that somewhere underneath the daily routine of your life, underneath the obligations and the noise and the carefully maintained surface of things, there is a part of you that knows. That has always known. That the life you are living and the life you are capable of living are not the same life. And you are tired of the distance between them. Good. Let that tiredness be useful. Let it be the fuel for what comes next. Because the 3 things we are about to remove, these final 3, are the ones that live the deepest. The ones that have been with you the longest. The ones that will resist the most. And the ones that, when finally released, will change everything. The 5th thing, the slow friendships. I need you to hear this carefully. Because this one is going to create resistance, and the resistance itself is going to be instructive. Not every friendship that began with genuine warmth deserves to continue indefinitely simply because it began. People change. Directions diverge. The person who was exactly right for who you were at 24 may be precisely wrong for who you are becoming at 38. And the slow, guilt-laden, obligation-driven maintenance of a friendship that has long since lost its mutual nourishment is not loyalty. It is inertia wearing loyalty's clothes. There is a particular kind of friendship I want to describe, and I want you to recognize it honestly, without the softening that sentimentality usually applies to these situations. It is the friendship where you always feel slightly worse after. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could easily explain to someone else. Just, slightly. A faint heaviness. A low-grade drain. The kind of interaction that doesn't restore you or challenge you or leave you feeling genuinely seen, but that you keep showing up for because it has been part of your life for so long that ending it feels like a kind of violence. It is not violence. It is honesty. A woman named Bernadette had a friend, a woman she had known since university, who had been a genuine source of warmth and connection in their early 20s. But somewhere in the years between then and now, something had shifted. Their values had diverged quietly but significantly. Their visions for their lives had moved in opposite directions. And the conversations that used to feel like coming home now felt like a performance, both of them playing the roles of the friendship rather than actually inhabiting it. Bernadette stayed for 6 more years out of history. Out of guilt. Out of the belief that longevity in a relationship is the same thing as value. It is not. When she finally allowed the friendship to quietly dissolve, no confrontation, no announcement, just a gradual, honest reduction of investment, she expected to feel loss. She felt relief. And then, in the space that opened up, space she hadn't realized was being occupied, she found room for the kind of connection she had actually been hungry for. Friendships built on who she was now rather than who she had been then. Seneca wrote with the precision of someone who understood how finite life actually is, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. This is the standard. Not history. Not obligation. Not the guilt of disappointing someone who has grown accustomed to your presence. Mutual elevation. Does this friendship make you better? Does it challenge your thinking, restore your energy, hold you accountable to your own values, celebrate your growth without resentment? If the honest answer is no, remove your investment. Quietly. Without a speech. Without cruelty. Just gradually, honestly, redirect the time and energy toward the connections that are actually serving the person you are becoming. The people who deserve you will find you, when you are no longer fully occupied by the people who don't. The 6th thing, the future you keep postponing. This one lives right at the center of the almost right life. And it is the one that will cost you the most if you do not address it directly. There is a dream, a specific, particular, deeply personal dream, that you have been carrying for longer than you want to admit. You know exactly what it is. You don't need me to help you identify it because it has never actually gone away. It just gets quieter during the busy seasons and louder in the still ones. It shows up uninvited at 3 in the morning. It colors the way you look at people who are living it, with a complicated mixture of inspiration and longing in something that feels uncomfortably close to grief. And every year, without quite making a conscious decision about it, you postpone it. Not forever. Just until the conditions are better. Until the timing is right. Until you have more money, more certainty, more confidence, fewer obligations, a clearer sign that it is the right move. The conditions will never be perfect. They were not perfect for anyone who ever built anything worth building. Let me tell you about a man named Eliot. Eliot had wanted to write a book since he was 27 years old. Not because he needed fame or external validation, but because there was something inside him, a particular way of seeing the world, a specific body of ideas and observations and hard-won understanding, that he genuinely believed had value. That he believed deserved to exist somewhere beyond the confines of his own head. He postponed it at 27 because he was establishing his career. He postponed it at 31 because he had young children. He postponed it at 36 because the timing wasn't right. He postponed it at 40 because life was complicated. At 44, Elliot's doctor found something concerning in a routine scan. It turned out to be nothing. But for 3 weeks, while he waited for results that would determine whether his life was about to change completely, Elliot sat with himself in a way he had been avoiding for 17 years. And the question that kept arriving, quietly and without mercy, was not about his career or his relationships or his finances. It was, what did I not do? What was I waiting for? What have I been postponing as if time were a resource I was guaranteed to have in abundance? The scan came back clear. And Elliot started writing the next morning. Not when he finished his current project. Not after the summer. Not when the children were older. The next morning. The book exists now. It is real. It is in the world. Not because the conditions finally aligned. But because Elliot finally understood, in the most visceral, undeniable, 3 a.m. way a human being can understand something, that the postponed life is not a paused life. It is a life being quietly spent on waiting. Remove the postponement. Not the caution is sometimes wisdom. But the postponement. The indefinite, comfort-seeking, fear-managed delay of the thing you already know you are supposed to be doing. Start. Imperfectly. Incompletely. Without the full plan or the perfect conditions or the confidence you are waiting to feel before you begin. Because the confidence does not come before the start. It comes because of it. The 7th thing, the version of yourself you perform for other people. We have arrived at the last one. And this is the deepest removal of all. The one that makes every other item on this list possible, or impossible, depending on whether you address it. You are performing. Not all the time. Not in every relationship or every context or every moment of your life. But in more of them than you would be comfortable admitting. There is a version of you that shows up for the world, curated, managed, adjusted, softened here and sharpened there, that is not quite the same as the version that exists when no one is watching. And the gap between those two versions is exactly the size of the life you are not living. I am not talking about appropriate social adaptation. Every functional human being calibrates their behavior to their context, that is not performance, that is maturity. I am talking about something more fundamental than that. I am talking about the chronic, exhausting, identity-eroding habit of making yourself into whatever version of yourself seems most likely to be accepted in the room you are currently standing in. The version that laughs at things that aren't funny to avoid awkwardness. That agrees with opinions it doesn't hold to avoid conflict. That hides its actual ambitions because they might make someone uncomfortable. That diminishes its own intelligence, sensitivity, creativity, or depth because someone once suggested those qualities were too much. There was a woman named Vera who was, in private, in the quiet of her own company, one of the most interesting people she knew. She thought in ways that surprised her. She had opinions that were genuinely original. She had humor that was dark and specific and brilliant. She had depth that she was aware of and quietly proud of. And in public, in virtually every social and professional context she inhabited, she made herself smaller than all of that. Not dramatically. Just, slightly less than. Slightly less sharp than she actually was. Slightly less direct. Slightly less herself. Presenting a version that was easier to digest, less likely to intimidate, less likely to attract the particular kind of attention that felt dangerous in ways she couldn't fully articulate. For years she called this being appropriate. A therapist she eventually saw called it something different. She called it self-erasure. And when Vera heard that word, self-erasure, something in her recognized it so completely and so uncomfortably that she cried for 20 minutes in a stranger's office. Because she had been erasing herself for so long. Not because anyone had held a gun to her head. But because at some early, formative, deeply impressionable moment in her life, she had learned that the full version of herself was not entirely safe to be. And she had been protecting herself from that imagined danger ever since. At the cost of herself. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, Stoic, man who could have performed grandeur for an entire empire and instead chose to write honestly in a private journal that he never intended anyone to read, wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. The performance breaks your word to yourself every time you engage in it." It says, implicitly, consistently, with every small adjustment and every swallowed truth, I do not trust the real version of me to be enough. Remove the performance. Not all at once, that would be its own kind of performance, the dramatic reveal of authenticity as a spectacle. But gradually. In small, private, daily acts of choosing the true thing over the acceptable thing. Say the opinion you actually hold, in the appropriate context, with appropriate tact, but without diluting it into something unrecognizable. Bring the quality of thinking you actually possess into the rooms you inhabit, without apologizing for it, without preemptively shrinking it to fit someone else's comfort. Be, as much as possible, the same person in public that you are in private. Not because the world deserves your full self as some kind of gift, but because you deserve to live in your full self. Because the performance is costing you something that no external achievement, no amount of approval, no degree of social comfort will ever compensate for. It is costing you the experience of your own life. From the inside. As yourself. What quiet removal actually looks like. I want to give you something practical before we close. Because this entire conversation has been building toward a question you are probably already asking. Where do I start? Not with all 7. Not with a sweeping life overhaul that requires announcing itself to everyone around you. Not with the biggest, most daunting thing on the list. Start with the one that created the most resistance when you heard it. Because resistance, that tightening in the chest, that instinct to argue, that voice that says yes but my situation is different, is not a sign that the point doesn't apply to you. It is a sign that it applies to you more than you want it to. That is your starting point. One quiet decision. One small removal. No announcement. No explanation. No waiting for the right moment or the perfect conditions or the consensus of the imaginary panel. Just the decision. Followed by the next one. And the next one after that. The Stoics did not believe in dramatic transformation. They believed in the daily, disciplined, patient practice of becoming, incrementally, honestly, without performance, more aligned with their own deepest values. Continuous improvement. Not revolution. Not reinvention. Just the quiet, faithful, daily removal of everything that is not you. Until what remains is something you recognize completely. Something you have perhaps not seen clearly in a very long time. Yourself. Uncluttered. Unhurried. Fully inhabited. That is what is waiting on the other side of everything you are about to quietly eliminate. And it is worth every uncomfortable moment of the removal. Subscribe to the Stoic Path. If this conversation reached you, if something in part 1 or here in part 2 named something you have been living but couldn't articulate, then I want you to know that this is exactly what the Stoic Path exists to do. Every week we come here and we have the kind of conversation that most content is too comfortable to have. We go beneath the surface. We ask the questions that actually matter. We bring the depth of Stoic philosophy into the real, specific, daily texture of modern human life, and we do it without flinching. If that is the conversation you have been hungry for, subscribe to the Stoic Path right now. Hit that button. Turn on your notifications. Because what we built together today is one conversation in an entire library of conversations designed to make you think more clearly, live more honestly, and move through the world with the kind of quiet, unshakable authority that only comes from people who have done the real work on themselves. Share this with someone who needs it. Not with an explanation. Not with a note that says I thought of you when I heard this. Just send it. Quietly. The way everything meaningful gets done. They will know why it arrived. This is the Stoic Path. 7 things removed. Quietly. Without telling anyone. Now watch what grows in you.